Hello, I'm Chris, and welcome to my video series on how to win your Yahoo Fantasy Hockey Pool. Today I'm going to give you a quick introduction as to what our video series will be about, as well as talk about one of the most overlooked and most important aspects to winning your hockey pool, which is an examination of the settings. So before we get into that, let's just talk quickly about who this series is designed for. Definitely anyone who is a casual fan of fantasy hockey, if you're looking to improve and get into the game, this video series will be geared towards you. If you're in a keeper league of any sort, where you're keeping players from one year to the next, or in a standard 1 year league, a lot of what I say will still be applicable towards that. This series is not geared towards daily fantasy players. Again, a lot of what I say might be applicable to daily fantasy, but for the most part, if you're gambling and especially if you're a serious gambler, this is probably not the video series for you. I have been quite successful. I started playing Yahoo Fantasy Hockey about 3 years ago in this same league, and the first year I won the regular season as well as the playoffs, and the second year I finished first in the regular season and second in the playoffs. And now here in my third year, I'm just wrapping up the regular season in third place, heading into the playoffs. So I've done okay. Obviously, I'm not where I was last year. I was hoping to win some money for finishing first, but someone else will get that this year, as we just have a couple of days, two more in fact, until the end of our regular season. This series will not cover playoff pools in the traditional sense. Obviously, there is the Yahoo Fantasy Playoffs, which we'll definitely get into probably in the next video. But we're not going to talk about the playoff pools that actually occur when the NHL playoffs occur, because that's after the regular season is done, and that's a different type of format altogether. And I don't even believe Yahoo has a playoff pool format, although I'm sure that's not too far away. So I may talk about playoff pools in future videos in a different context, but when I talk about the playoffs with regards to this pool, we're talking about the playoffs that begin the week 23, March 21st. And if those playoffs were to start today, my team would be starting in third place and facing the sixth place team to get started and hopefully make it through a few rounds to the finals. Today, however, we're going to talk about settings, and the reason I want to talk about settings is because they're so important and so many people don't pay attention to them, and they affect your game in so many ways. So as you saw there, we can access the settings from the league overview and then go to settings panel, and I'm just going to quickly review them one by one to highlight the most important. So number of teams is definitely something you should pay attention to. If you have a 8 league team versus 14 or 16, it can make a huge difference in terms of your depth of knowledge required to be successful, as well as the player pool available is going to be a lot larger when you have a larger league, such as I do here. So that's why I hope it'll be helpful to most people, because I am playing in a fairly deep league, so we are going to be dealing with some players and choices that are definitely peripheral guys, and maybe not the Sidney Crosbys and Carey Prices of fantasy hockey in everyday situations. So head to head generally is the most, I believe, most popular format on Yahoo, where each week you play a different opponent from your league, and your scores against that opponent are tallied up in terms of points, and you have an overall scoreboard, as I showed you at the beginning here, where you accumulate points for the season. So my record is 105, 76, and 50, 105 wins, 76 losses, and 50 ties. Going back to the settings, which we're going to be focusing on today. Acquisitions are also quite important in terms of, you don't want to have limitations ideally on the maximum number of acquisitions, although if you do, it makes making moves a lot more difficult and a lot more valuable. Same goes for trades. If there's limitations on trades in your particular league, you're going to have to be very aware when making deals of how many other deals you're able to make as well. But don't have experience really in either format where your acquisitions or trades are limited. Trade reject time, that's an important one. That basically is the amount of time in which people can object to a trade that's been made. So I find 2 days to be pretty short. That basically means that you're going to have to be checking the pool at least once every 2 days if you want to make sure a sketchy trade gets vetoed or objected to. Trade end date is the last date of the season where a trade deadline. Although I'm not sure necessarily if we'll be able to make acquisitions between the off season and the start of the next year, and that's something I've asked and actually I don't know. So that'll be interesting to find out, and that's going to be a reality sometimes in these pools. Is there may be information that could be valuable to your decision making that you just don't know, and that's one of the things in this case is I don't know if we'll be able to make moves after the playoffs are done, but before the start of the regular season. And definitely some of my transactions this year might have been made better or worse depending on how that happens. So allow draft pick trades. Yes, that means that it is a keeper or dynasty format, and you can trade draft picks for the following year. And I've been involved in several of those transactions already this season. The one thing to be aware of is that you are not getting a straight draft pick on its own. You always have to send one back as well. And there might be limitations to how low of a pick you have to send back based on the number of people drafting in your league next year. The waiver time is similar. If you are not logging in at least once every 2 days, you may lose out on an opportunity to pick up on a player that you would have liked that another player dropped. So in the format that I'm playing, it's important that we're checking in at least every 2 days if you want to be on top and winning, which ideally you do. And if you want to win your hockey pool, if the settings are similar to what I have here, the reality is you are probably going to have to check it every day or two to be successful. Waiver type, continual rolling list. This is the only format I'm familiar with in terms of waivers, which just means that the priority for who gets the first shot at players on the waiver wire rolls and changes with each week. Also, a standard waiver mode. I'm not sure what the alternative to that would be. Can't cut list provider. I'm not familiar with this one. However, I assume it means that there are players that can't be cut, and this is some type of enforcement for that. Trade review. In the past few years, this has been a voting situation. However, this year it's the commissioner who basically will decide based on appeals. We've only had one trade that was objected, and he did in fact veto it. So so far that seems like it's worked out fairly well. Post-draft players, I'm not sure what that means. Follow waiver rules seems like a logical setting to have. Max acquisitions per week. This used to be in our league 4, and now it's down to 3. Even if it was less than that, I would struggle with that because sometimes you make a transaction you don't want, and suddenly you've made 2 more transactions and you've blown out your acquisitions for the week. And it's tough. A lot of people don't make very many transactions, but I like to have hot players in my lineup. So I would say for this season in particular, I've probably come close to using the 3 transactions almost every week, and that's a style that's unique to me. Certainly, the other top players don't necessarily make as many moves as I do, but I make good moves and I make bad moves, and it seems like the volume is what ends up balancing it out in my favor. Is that I just tend to make a few more good moves than I do poor moves, and that ends up working out well for me. Minimum goalie appearances, and this is another really important one. And you can really have your chances of success affected by not paying close attention to this stat because it's having a huge impact on the league I'm playing in this year. So a minimum of 2 goalie appearances means that for your goalie stats to count for the week, you only need goalies to appear in 2 games, and that doesn't mean start, that doesn't mean play 60 minutes, that just means appear. Therefore, in a situation like we have here, the guy who's in first place currently has a Braden Holtby, who starts obviously almost every game his team plays, has a very high save percentage, and is able to basically have just one goalie in his lineup, and that gives them an extra forward or defenseman, which is a very valuable thing to do because he has so few minimum goalie appearances. If this number was a 3 or a 4, that would basically force everyone to dress at least 2, if not, and probably more likely 3 goaltenders every week. And right now we're seeing a situation where, from my perspective, 1 or 2 seems like the best number. 3 maybe, but definitely if your goalie appearances are 2 or less, you definitely want to consider running just 1 or 2 elite goalies if you can, because you can get away with having an extra spot at forward or D. Weekly deadline, I'm not sure exactly what that reference is. Perhaps someone can explain that in the comments. Start scoring on week 1. I don't know why you wouldn't start scoring on week 1, but I guess that people can customize that setting. And then the playoffs are weeks 23, 24, and 25, with 8 teams making the playoffs, and week 25 running for 7 days. Why would it run 7 days? I'm not sure. Again, 8 teams, that's a very important number to take note of relative to the max number of teams in the league, which is 14. So that means that slightly more than half of the teams will make the playoffs. So if you finish, if you win, more than you lose in this type of format, you're guaranteed to make it in. Playoff reseeding, yes, that basically means that the top finisher will place the that basically means that after round 1 in the playoffs, players will be reseeded based on their finishes again. Lock eliminated teams, I assume that means that people who have been eliminated can't dump their lineups, but I'm not certain. Divisions, no. Make league publicly viewable, up to you. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Invite permissions commissioner, and now we're getting into the important stuff, which is the roster positions and stats. So roster positions, as we have it set up, are 2 centers, 2 left wings, 2 right wings, 4 defense, 2 utility players, 2 goaltenders, 4 bench spots, and 2 IR spots. And the really important ones to pay attention to there are the number of utility players and the number of IR spots. And those were 2 areas where I made a mistake, where the settings were changed between last season and this, and I didn't quite catch that we were adding utility players and adding an extra IR spot. And I made some management errors at the beginning of the season, and I made some drafting errors towards the end of my draft, thinking that I would need more wingers than I actually would. I remember last year, really there was a premium on wingers because there wasn't a utility spot, and now with the addition of the utility spot, it makes you can have 5 or 6 centers on your team and just a couple of wingers, and still manage to get away with that in most situations, which was new to me. And then the addition of the second IR spot, I was used to only having 1 before. A second IR can make a big difference. And you can play more IR games, and what I mean by that is, like, if you're planning on making a transaction, why not first add the best player in free agency who's on IR to your roster, then put him on the IR, and then add the guy you're going to add on anyways. And then if the guy comes back from IR, you have first crack at him versus anyone else in the league, which can be a little advantage that I probably use on an average maybe once per season. Goaltender stat categories also very, very, very important. So wins, losses, save percentage, and shutouts are we skipped a part there. Let's go back. The forward categories are there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 versus 1, 2, 3, 4 goaltender categories. So if my math is right, goaltending makes up about 37% of the overall score or whatever, which if you think about it is actually quite a big number. All close to 40% of the league here is being based on goaltending, and that's a big number. For the forward categories, this is fairly standard, with the exception of perhaps shorthanded points, which is not a very common stat to see. So we have goals, assists, plus minus, penalty minutes, power play points, shorthanded points, and game-winning goals. Shorthanded points definitely is the least common seen in other pools, and therefore probably makes it the most important in terms of identifying players that are going to be giving you points in that category, because there's so few and far between. One shorthanded point a week is usually going to be the difference between winning and losing your matchup. So that's a huge factor in our league, and one of the reasons I've been successful in previous years and maybe not successful this year is because I didn't quite value that as well as I should have, but we'll get back to that at some later point. So goals and assists are fairly self-explanatory. You want players that are going to give you both of those categories in as high numbers as possible. Plus minus is basically how good a team does this player play on? Yes, the individual player, if they're very defensively responsible, is going to have an impact on that as well. So you need to be aware of the team the player plays on. If the player gets a ton of power play time and very little even strength, they may end up with a negative number. Also, if the player is a shutdown type of player on a good team, you may end up seeing them with a minus number if they're asked to go up against the opponent's best players every night. So plus minus is kind of a twofold game. Where is the player playing in the lineup, and who is he playing against? And then the opposite side of that being, what quality of team is this player going to be on? And often that is a bit of a crapshoot at the beginning of the season when, let's say for next year, you're looking at the Edmonton Oilers. How good are they going to be? Or the Toronto Maple Leafs, are they going to be ready to make a run at the playoffs? Penalty minutes is another very important stat, and it's a controversial one. It's very common in a lot of leagues, and it's a difficult one to predict, because especially with the concept of stage fights gradually leaving the NHL game, guys who get penalty minutes just tend to be the more aggressive players, not necessarily the fighters, but the guys who play a chippier type of game, like a Wayne Simmons or a Milan Lucic. So that's a very important category, and I think often when I'm evaluating two players, the number of penalty minutes and the shorthanded points, at least for the league we're playing in, is often the biggest differentiator, as well as plus minus, because I seem to not do well with plus minus, and that's a category where I need to improve. Power play points is a category that basically comes down to how well are you following where the players in your lineup are playing on the power play, if they're playing on the power play, and ensuring that if you have anyone in your lineup, really any forward or defenseman in your lineup that's not playing on their team's power play, you need to ask yourself what they're doing on your team. And I think in the case of the league that I'm playing with, if that player isn't giving me shorthanded points in spades, like for example Jean-Gabriel Pageau, then he better be giving me power play points or he doesn't have a spot on my team. Game-winning goals is basically, I mean, you can argue that there are certain types of players and certain players that score bigger goals at bigger times than other players, and I think that's especially true in the playoffs, but this is not going to focus on the actual NHL playoffs. This is the Yahoo playoffs that matter, and game-winning goals, therefore, is basically a stat directly correlated to the goal stat. So the more goals you're going to get, the more game-winning goals you're going to get, and there's not going to be a lot of variation between those two numbers. Goaltending stats are also very simple yet deceptive in certain ways. Shutouts are notoriously hard to predict. In the last few years, there have been very, very few goaltenders that have sustained a high number of shutouts from year to year. So rather than focusing on that number, I would just encourage you to find the best goaltender on the best team that you can, and the shutouts will come. Wins is a reflection of how often your goalie starts if they're on a good team. Let's hope they are on a good team, because if you want to be successful in goaltending, you're not only going to have a goaltender that is playing well, but is also on a good team, because that's going to affect their wins as well as every other category here. Ideally, you have a goalie that's going to get a lot of starts, that is the designated number one guy on his team, that's not in a platoon or a sharing situation. And if you can get that on a good team, the wins are going to really start piling up. Losses is a category that you have to be very careful of, and I was not ready for that this year. And that goes back to having the number of goaltenders you have on your team. And this is where having 3 or 4 guys on your team can end up being a detriment rather than a benefit when it comes to goaltending. Losses is a category that is just so easy to lose, even with quality guys, if you have 3 or more goaltenders. And so if you have this category in your league and you have more than 2 goaltenders, you really have to take a look at how many losses those are getting you versus guys that are running just 2 goalies, because often your goalies will play a little bit better but still end up with more losses than they do, just because you have more goalies on your team. Save percentage, I think, is the category that I now value most, because it's, players move and goaltenders move, and a goaltender can move from one situation to the next. So especially if you've invested trades or draft picks into your goalie, and his situation changes, the save percentage is the one thing that probably won't, because a good goalie is a good goalie and a mediocre goalie is a mediocre goalie. So when I look at a goalie's save percentage is arguably one of the most important stats that I'm looking at, and that's about it. We already talked about shutouts. So hopefully I've given you a good explanation as to why settings are important, and I know that's a bit of a dry topic, but they're really, really important to understand if you want to be successful, and really understanding the stat categories and the ones that your teams are weak in and where they can be improved, and then finding players that fit those needs is the key to being successful, and we'll explore those further in further videos. I think in the next video we're going to talk about keeper leagues versus one-year formats, and some of the decisions, especially as you get closer to the end of the season, the trade deadline, the playoffs, that matter respectively to both, and we'll talk about playoffs and playoff preparation, both the way the playoffs will roll out and the choices you have to make, as well as what you can do towards the end of the regular season to be successful there. So thank you for watching my video, and we'll see you next time.